Welcome, traveller, to this quiet space where we descend into the darkest corners of Hallownest, where tonight we will explore the disturbing lore of Hollow Knight, the horrors hidden beneath the beauty of this fallen kingdom, the atrocities committed in the name of civilization, the sacrifices demanded by a king who believed no cost was too great, and the fates of those who were consumed by ambition, by plague, by the desperate need to survive in a world that was crumbling around them. If these stories help you find rest, if the slow unravelling of Hallownest's most unsettling truths guides you gently into sleep, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing, not because I need the numbers, but because there are others out there searching for these deep dives into the lore they love, and subscribing helps them find their way here, helps the algorithm understand that slow, thorough, respectful explorations of game lore matter. But whether you subscribe or not, you're welcome here. The story will unfold the same. Now let your breathing slow, let your body sink deeper into comfort, let your shoulders drop and your jaw unclench, and let us begin our descent into the disturbing truths of Hallownest, into the darkness that lurks beneath even the most beautiful places in this kingdom of ruins and regret. Close your eyes now, and picture yourself standing at the edge of the well in Dirtmouth, that small fading village perched above the forgotten kingdom below, and feel the cold air rising from the depths, carrying with it the scent of ancient stone and damp earth, and something else, something faintly sweet and faintly wrong. The lingering trace of the infection that consumed this place, the remnant of a goddess's rage and a kingdom's failure. Hallownest appears at first glance to be a place of melancholy beauty, of rain falling on elegant architecture, of luminous crystals glowing in mountain caverns, of lush gardens and quiet fungal groves. But beneath that beauty lies something far more unsettling, a foundation of cruelty and sacrifice and horror that the kingdom's citizens either did not know about or chose not to see. And tonight we will look at what they could not or would not look at. We will descend into the places where the disturbing truths of Hallownest are most visible, most undeniable, most impossible to ignore. Let your breathing match the rhythm of your descent, slow and steady, deeper and deeper, as we begin with perhaps the most disturbing truth of all, the mass death of children in the abyss, the foundation upon which the Pale King built his most desperate hope. The abyss lies at the very bottom of Hallownest, beneath the ancient basin, beneath the White Palace, beneath everything, a place of absolute darkness where the void pools like black water, where the air is heavy with the weight of something ancient and unknowable, and where the floor is covered, entirely covered, with the broken shells of dead children. These are the vessels, the offspring of the Pale King and the White Lady, created by the thousands for one singular purpose, to serve as a hollow container for the Radiance, the goddess of light whose infection was consuming the kingdom. The Pale King and his queen conceived these children not out of love, not out of desire for offspring, but as a manufacturing process, a systematic production of potential tools, each one cast into the void of the abyss to be infused with that dark substance, to be made hollow, to be emptied of everything that might make them a person, a self, a being capable of thought or feeling or will. The eggs were thrown into the darkness, and the developing bugs within were transformed, became creatures of shell and shadow, part offspring of higher beings and part void. And then they were tested, subjected to a brutal trial that most of them could not survive. The test was a climb, a desperate scramble upward from the depth of the abyss toward the light above, and as the vessels climbed, small and silent and struggling, they fell, their shells cracking against the walls, their forms tumbling back into the void, their brief existences ending in darkness and anonymity. The Pale King watched from above, observing, evaluating, waiting for one vessel to prove itself pure enough, hollow enough, empty enough to serve his purpose. And as each vessel fell, as each child died, he felt nothing that the law records, expressed no grief that the game documents, simply continued the process, continued creating and discarding and watching and waiting. The scale of this is staggering. The floor of the abyss is carpeted with shells, thousands upon thousands of them, each one the remains of a child who was born to be tested and died having failed, who existed for no other reason than to be evaluated and discarded, who was never given a name or an identity or any acknowledgement that they had lived at all. Let your body relax deeper now. Let the tension drain from your muscles as you breathe slowly and steadily, as we sit with this truth, as we understand that the kingdom of Hallownest, that civilization of beauty and intellect and pale light, was built upon a foundation of infanticide, upon the systematic creation and destruction of children on a scale that defies comprehension. The White Lady, the queen who bore these thousands of children, understood what she had done, and her response to that understanding was to bind herself with roots in the queen's gardens, to physically restrain herself so that she could never bear more children, could never produce more vessels, could never participate again in what she and the Pale King had done. Her self-imprisonment is an act of penance, a recognition that her fundamental nature, her ability to create life, had been weaponized, had been turned into a mechanism for producing disposable children, and she could not trust herself, could not trust her own fertility, could not allow the possibility that more vessels might be created and more children might die in the darkness of the abyss. The White Lady speaks to the night with a mixture of hope and guilt, recognizing the vessel as one of her children, one of the discarded ones who somehow survived, and in that recognition there is sorrow. There is the weight of a mother who knows that she participated in the deaths of thousands of her offspring, who understands that the creature standing before her is one of the few who escaped the fate she helped create for them. The Pale King's philosophy, inscribed in the White Palace, was simply this: no cost too great. These three words encapsulate everything disturbing about Hallownest's response to the infection, for they mean exactly what they say, that there was no price the king was unwilling to pay, no sacrifice he would refuse to make, no amount of suffering he would not inflict if he believed it would save his kingdom. No cost too great meant that thousands of children could be created and killed. No cost too great meant that 3 beings could be condemned to eternal conscious sleep. No cost too great meant that one child, the Hollow Knight, the vessel deemed pure enough to contain the radiance, could be sealed in chains in a dark temple, with a screaming goddess trapped inside its mind, suffering alone for years or decades without end. The Pale King's philosophy was not the desperate pragmatism of a ruler facing impossible circumstances. It was the ideology of a being who had decided that his kingdom's survival justified any atrocity, any horror, any amount of suffering inflicted upon any number of beings, and who pursued that ideology to its logical and terrible conclusion. But here is what makes the Pale King's story even more disturbing, even more unsettling than the simple fact of his cruelty. The memory hidden at the end of the Path of Pain, that brutally difficult platforming gauntlet concealed within the White Palace, shows us a moment between the Pale King and the Hollow Knight, the chosen vessel, and in that moment the Hollow Knight looks back at the king, and the king reaches toward the vessel, and there is something in that gesture that resembles tenderness, that suggests affection, that implies the king cared for this child in a way he never intended to. That despite his philosophy of no cost too great, Despite his determination to create a hollow tool, he developed a bond with the vessel he had chosen, felt something for the child he was about to condemn to eternal torment. The Pale King knew in that moment that the Hollow Knight was not truly hollow, that it had developed an idea instilled, that the plan was flawed, that the vessel would eventually fail, and he sealed it anyway. He took the child he may have loved, the child who had developed something resembling consciousness because of his care, and he chained it in darkness with a goddess, knowing that the seal would eventually break, knowing that the suffering would be for nothing because he'd already paid too much to stop. Because admitting failure would mean admitting that the thousands of dead children in the abyss had died for nothing. Let your breathing slow even further now. Let your body sink deeper into the comfort of your bed. Let the weight of these truths settle over you, not as a burden but as understanding, as knowledge that enriches your comprehension of this world even as it disturbs. And let us turn our attention to the soul sanctum, that towering institution in the City of Tears where the pursuit of knowledge became the pursuit of horror, where scholars who once sought to expand the mind became torturers and murderers, where the desire to cure the infection led to experiments that were as terrible as the plague itself. The Soul Sanctum was founded as a place of genuine scholarship, yet an institution where Hallownest's brightest minds studied soul, that vital energy that animates all living bugs, seeking to understand consciousness, to expand mental capabilities, to achieve states of pure focus that transcended ordinary awareness. The scholars were intelligent, dedicated, respected members of the kingdom's intellectual community, bugs who believed in the power of knowledge and the value of careful research. When the infection began to spread, this Soul Master, the leader of the Sanctum, became convinced that soul held the key to a cure, that by manipulating and concentrating soul, the infection could be resisted, could be reversed, could be eliminated entirely. The Pale King opposed this research, refused to support it, saw in it something dangerous, but the Soul Master defied the king, continued his work in secret, and brought his fellow scholars with him into increasingly dark territory. The experiments began with volunteers, infected bugs who came to the Sanctum hoping for a cure, hoping that the scholars' expertise could save them from the plague. But the procedures failed. The volunteers died, their bodies unable to withstand the soul manipulation, and the Soul Master, rather than acknowledging failure, became more obsessive, more determined, convinced that a breakthrough was imminent if only he had more subjects, more soul, more opportunities to experiment. The scholars began to take subjects by force, capturing citizens from the City of Tears, bringing them to the Sanctum against their will, subjecting them to procedures that tore apart their consciousness, that drained the vital energy from their bodies. Just that left them as empty husks or as twisted, deformed creatures that bore no resemblance to what they had been. The Soul Sanctum became a charnel house, its elegant halls filled with the corpses of victims, its chambers echoing with sounds that no place of learning should ever contain. And the scholars, their own minds increasingly affected by the infection and by the madness of their obsessive research, lost all connection to the ethical principles that had once guided their work. The process of draining soul from a living bug is agonizing. It tears apart the consciousness, leaves the victim in a state of existential horror as they feel their very essence being pulled from their body, as they experience the dissolution of self, the loss of everything that makes them who they are. Some victims died quickly, their bodies failing under the strain. Others were kept alive through the scholar's soul manipulation, subjected to multiple procedures, drained and allowed to partially recover and drained again, used repeatedly until there was nothing left of them, until they were hollow in a way that had nothing to do with the Pale King's vessels, and everything to do with the cruelty of bugs who had forgotten that their subjects were people. The bodies of the victims can be found throughout the sanctum, piled in corners, left in chambers, discarded like refuse, each one representing a life ended in agony, a person who trusted the institution that killed them, or who was taken by force and given no choice in their own destruction. Some of the scholars themselves were destroyed by their own experiments. The mistakes and follies that drift through the sanctum's halls are former scholars whose bodies were deformed by failed soul manipulation, who attempted to transform themselves through the absorption of stolen soul, and whose forms collapsed, broke down, became unstable, leaving them as floating, shapeless creatures that retained only the barest remnants of what they had been, that existed in a state between life and death, conscious enough perhaps to suffer, but not conscious enough to understand what they had become or to remember what they had been. The mistakes are called mistakes because that is what they are. The failures of experiments that should never have been conducted, evidence of how completely the pursuit of knowledge can go wrong when it is divorced from ethics, when the desire to achieve overrides all consideration for the cost of that achievement. The follies are similar but larger, their bodies bloated and distended by the soul that warped them, drifting through the halls like grotesque balloons, attacking anything that moves not out of malice, but out of whatever broken instinct still animates their ruined forms. The soul twisters and soul warriors fared better in some respects, succeeded in absorbing enough stolen soul to enhance their abilities, to develop the power to teleport, to shape soul into projectiles, to fight with devastating effectiveness. But the cost of their success was their identity, their memory, their connection to who they had been. The soul warriors have only a very hazy grasp of their own memories and the origins of their powers. They fight not because they understand what they are fighting for, but because fighting is what they do now. Because their transformation reduced them to demonstrations of power without purpose, without meaning, without any awareness of why they exist or what they were supposed to achieve. They are scholars who traded everything that made them scholars, their curiosity, their intellect, their capacity for wonder, for the ability to hit things harder, and they do not even remember making that trade. Let your eyes remain closed. Let your body become heavier and more relaxed with each breath as we consider the Soul Master himself, the leader who drove the sanctum into madness, who bloated himself with the soul of his victims until his body swelled into a grotesque floating mass that barely resembled a bug, who became so consumed by his obsession with immortality that he could no longer distinguish between the cure he sought and the disease he carried. The Soul Master's dream form, the Soul Tyrant, reveals through the dream nail a mind consumed by doubt and betrayal, a growing realization that the Radiance had manipulated him, that the orange light he mistook for enlightenment was actually the infection working through his mind, twisting his ambitions, turning his desire to save the kingdom into the instrument of his own damnation. The Soul Master was infected, was being used by the very plague he sought to cure, and his experiments, his cruelty, his transformation of the sanctum from a place of learning into a place of horror were all part of the infection's work, the Radiance turning Hallownest's institutions against themselves, using the kingdom's greatest strengths as weapons for its destruction. Now let us descend further still, into Deepnest, that place of primal darkness that exists at the margins of Hallownest, where the spiders dwell in tunnels of silk and shadow, where the air is thick with the sound of skittering legs and the sense that you're being watched by things you cannot see. Deepness is perhaps the most immediately frightening area in Hollow Knight, a place designed to make the player feel vulnerable, exposed, hunted. But its true horror is not in its atmosphere, but in its stories, in the fate of its queen, in the bargain she made with the Pale King, in what happened to her kingdom after she was gone. Hera the Beast was the queen of Deepness, a powerful spider who ruled her people with strength and independence, who maintained Deepness' sovereignty even as Hallownest expanded around it. The Pale King needed 3 dreamers to seal the Temple of the Black Egg, 3 beings powerful enough to sustain the magical locks that would keep the Hollow Knight and the Radiance contained, and Hera was one of those he needed. But Hera had no loyalty to the Pale King, no reason to sacrifice herself for his kingdom, no motivation to enter eternal sleep for the benefit of a civilization she was not truly part of. So the Pale King made her an offer, a bargain that reveals the transactional cruelty at the heart of his philosophy. He would give Hera a child, a daughter born of the king himself, a child who would carry the power of a higher being and ensure Deepness' future, and in exchange, Hera would become a dreamer, would enter eternal sleep, and would sacrifice her waking life forever. Hera accepted. She received her daughter, Hornet, raised her for whatever time she had, and then fulfilled her end of the bargain, went to sleep in the beast's den, surrounded by her devout followers, and dreamed. And her dream became one of the 3 locks on the Temple of the Black Egg. But consider what this bargain cost, not just Hera, but her entire kingdom. When Hera fell asleep, Deepness lost its queen, lost its organizing principle, lost the ruler who held the Spider Kingdom together, and without her, Deepness descended into chaos, into the hostile, predatory wasteland that the night encounters, a place where the spiders have reverted to their most territorial and aggressive instincts, where civilization has collapsed, a land where the creatures that once formed a kingdom now simply hunt and survive and attack anything that enters their territory. Hera did not just sacrifice herself, she sacrificed her entire kingdom, abandoned her people to dissolution and chaos, traded the future of every spider in Deepness for one child, for Hornet, for the daughter she wanted so desperately that she was willing to pay any price the Pale King demanded. And Hornet must live with this knowledge, must carry the understanding that her existence cost her mother everything, that Hera traded her kingdom, her people, her waking life, her future, all of it, for the chance to have a daughter. Hornet exists because of the political transaction between a king and a queen, a bargain where her mother's freedom was the currency and her existence was the purchase. Yeah, and she must navigate the ruins of 2 kingdoms, Hallownest and Deepness, knowing that she is the reason one of them lost its queen, knowing that her birth was the price her mother paid for a seal that would eventually fail, knowing that everything her mother sacrificed was ultimately for nothing, because the Hollow Knight could not contain the radiance and the infection returned regardless. Deepness itself harbours other horrors beyond the loss of its queen. The Nosk, that creature that lurks in the deepest tunnels, is a predatory mimic that takes the form of familiar shapes to lure prey into its lair. When the knight encounters Nosk, it appears first as what looks like another vessel, a sibling, a familiar face in the darkness, and the knight follows this false image through twisting passages until it arrives in Nosk's den, where the creature reveals its true form, a grotesque spidery thing with too many legs and a gaping maw, surrounded by the corpses of previous victims who were lured by the same trick. Nosk represents the predatory nature of Deepness at its most refined, a creature that uses trust and recognition as weapons, that exploits the desire for connection and familiarity to lead its victims to their deaths. The weavers, the spider artisans who once created beautiful works of silk and thread, have largely abandoned Deepnest, departed through a passage called the Distant Village, leaving behind their looms and their creations and the remnants of a culture that once produced art and beauty even in the darkness. Their departure is another consequence of Hera's sleep, another loss that the kingdom suffered when its queen was gone, another thread in the tapestry of Deepnest's dissolution from a civilization into a hunting ground. The Distant Village itself is an unsettling place, filled with the husks of bugs that appear to have been bound in silk, cocooned and left, their fates unclear, the village itself empty and echoing with the absence of the people who once lived there. Let your breathing become even slower now. Let your consciousness begin to drift toward the edges of sleep as we turn our attention to the infection itself, to what it truly does to the bugs it consumes, to the horror of a plague that does not simply kill, but traps its victims in a state between consciousness and oblivion, aware enough to suffer, but unable to resist or escape what is happening to them. The infection is not a disease in any ordinary sense. It is the psychic manifestation of the Radiance's desperate attempt to be remembered, to reclaim the worshippers who forgot her when the Pale King gave them individual minds. The Radiance was the goddess of the moths, a being of pure light who sustained her people through collective consciousness, through a shared dream of unity and warmth and belonging. And when the moths accepted the Pale King's gift of individual thought, they forgot her, not cruelly, not deliberately, but simply because individual consciousness focuses on the self, on the immediate, on the tangible world, and the Radiance, who existed in dream and light and memory, faded from their thoughts. But she did not fade quietly. She reached out from the dream realm, appeared in the sleeping minds of Hallownest's citizens, and the infection was born from the collision between her call to return and their resistance to that call, a plague that was neither purely the Radiance's aggression, nor purely the bug's weakness, but something created by the conflict between two incompatible forms of consciousness trying to occupy the same minds. What makes the infection truly disturbing is not the orange light that leaks from infected eyes, not the aggression that replaces rational thought, not even the loss of individual identity, but the suggestion that infected bugs retain some awareness of what is happening to them, that they are trapped inside their own corrupted bodies, conscious enough to know that they are losing themselves but unable to stop the process, unable to resist. The unable to do anything except experience the slow dissolution of everything that made them who they were. The infection does not grant the mercy of unconsciousness, does not simply erase the mind and replace it with something else. It overwrites the mind while the mind watches, dissolves the self while the self is aware of its own dissolution, turns a person into a husk while some fragment of that person remains, buried deep beneath the orange light, screaming in silence. Myla is the most heartbreaking example of this process. When the night first encounters her in the Crystal Peak, she is cheerful, optimistic, singing a little song while she mines crystals, a simple bug living a simple life, happy in her work, warm in her greeting of the night. If the night returns later, after progressing further into the game, Myla's song has changed, has become distorted, the words garbled, the melody twisted, and the orange light has begun to appear in her eyes, subtle at first but growing brighter with each visit. If the night returns even later, Myla is fully infected, no longer singing, no longer friendly, just another husk that attacks on sight, her pickaxe swinging at the night with the same motion she once used to mine crystals. her body going through the motions of her former life, but with all the meaning stripped away, all the joy replaced by mindless aggression, all the warmth replaced by the cold light of the Radiance's will. The player must either avoid Myla or strike her down, and either choice is a tragedy, for Myla did nothing wrong, was simply a miner who loved her work, who sang while she laboured, who was kind to a stranger passing through, and the infection took her anyway, burned away her personality, her happiness, her self, and left only a husk wearing her body. The broken vessel is another disturbing reminder of what the infection does to those it claims. The broken vessel is a sibling of the night, another vessel that was created in the abyss and discarded, another child of the Pale King who was deemed not pure enough, not hollow enough, not worthy of being the chosen container for the Radiance. This vessel somehow survived, somehow made it out of the abyss, but was caught by the infection, was filled with the orange light that found purchase in whatever minimal consciousness the vessel possessed, and was transformed into a creature of rage and suffering, its shell cracked, its body leaking infection, its movements jerky and violent and wrong. The broken vessel attacks the knight in the ancient basin, and the fight is disturbing not because of its difficulty but because of what it represents. A sibling, a fellow child of the abyss, a being that shared the knight's origin, and the knight's fate of being discarded, now reduced to this, to a puppet of the infection, to a broken thing that exists only to suffer and to spread suffering. When the knight defeats the broken vessel, it can later be fought again as the lost kin in the dream realm, and the lost kin is even more tragic, faster, more desperate, more aggressive, the dream version of a vessel that is fighting with everything it has against the corruption that consumed it, that is still trying, even in death, even in dream, to resist the infection, to be what it was supposed to be, to fulfill the purpose it was created for, even though that purpose was denied it by the Pale King who threw it away. Take a deep breath now, hold it gently for a moment, and release it slowly, letting your body settle even deeper into stillness as we consider the dreamers, those three beings who sacrificed their waking lives to maintain the seal on the temple of the Black Egg, who entered eternal sleep so that the Hollow Knight could remain imprisoned with the Radiance, who gave up everything they were and everything they might have been for a plan that was already failing when they made their sacrifice. The dreamers are not simply asleep, they are conscious within their sleep, aware of their dreaming, experiencing their imprisonment in a state that is neither life nor death, but something worse than either. Lurien the Watcher has been in his spire in the City of Tears, asleep but aware, maintaining the seal, unable to move or act or speak or do anything except dream and hold the lock closed for years, possibly for decades, possibly for longer. His butler and his servants remained at his side, faithful to their master, but the infection found them too, corrupted them, turned them into hostile guardians of a master who cannot wake, cannot help them, cannot even acknowledge their presence or their suffering. Lurien was the most loyal of the Pale King's servants, devoted utterly to the kingdom and its ruler, and his willingness to become a dreamer was the ultimate expression of that loyalty. But his loyalty condemned him to an eternity of conscious paralysis, of awareness without agency, of existing as a function rather than as a person. Monomon the teacher, the scholar of the archives, understood the plan's flaw better than perhaps anyone else. She knew that a vessel could never be truly hollow, that the very act of existing implies some form of consciousness, and she knew that the seal would eventually fail. But she became a dreamer anyway, not out of blind loyalty like Lurien, but out of a calculated recognition that the plan, even flawed, would buy time, would delay the infection's return, would give Hallownest however many years or decades of peace the seal could hold. Monomon also planned for the seal's eventual failure, created Quirrell and sent him away with her mask, ensured that there would be a way to break the seal when the time came, when someone strong enough arrived to face the Radiance directly. Monomon's sacrifice was the most clear-eyed, the most deliberate, the most informed, and therefore in some ways the most tragic, because she went into eternal conscious sleep knowing exactly what she was doing, knowing it would not last, knowing that she was condemning herself to years of aware imprisonment for a temporary reprieve that would end in the same crisis it was meant to prevent. Hera the Beast, as we've discussed, became a dreamer not out of loyalty or duty, but because of a bargain, a transaction in which her freedom was exchanged for a child. Hera's sacrifice is disturbing in its transactional nature, in the way it reduces the eternal imprisonment of a sentient being to a line item in a political negotiation, a cost to be weighed against the benefit of a child, a price to be paid in exchange for a specific deliverable. The Pale King needed Hera's power for his seal, and Hera needed the Pale King's cooperation to have a child, and so they traded, each getting what they wanted at a cost that was staggering but apparently acceptable to both parties. The cold calculus of this exchange, the reduction of a person's entire future to a bargaining chip, the willingness of both parties to treat consciousness and freedom as commodities to be traded, speaks to something deeply disturbing about the values of Hallownest's rulers, about the way that power and desperation can transform beings into resources, people into tools, lives into costs to be calculated and paid. When the night kills the dreamers, when it breaks the seals on the Temple of the Black Egg, it is performing an act that is simultaneously murder and mercy. The dreamers die. Their dreams end. Their consciousness ceases, but so does their imprisonment, their eternal awareness, their decades of existing as locks rather than as people. Lurien accepts his death with the same loyalty that led him to become a dreamer, trusting that the night knows what it is doing, that the seal must be broken for some greater purpose. Monomon accepts her death with the calm of someone who planned for this moment, who always knew it would come, who arranged the circumstances of her own release. Hera does not speak, does not acknowledge the night, simply sleeps and dies, her silence perhaps the most disturbing thing of all, the suggestion that she had nothing left to say, that decades of conscious imprisonment had reduced her to silence, that the queen who bargained with a king for a child had become something that could no longer communicate. That had been worn smooth by years of dreaming the same dream, holding the same lock, existing in the same state of aware paralysis, until there was nothing left of the person she had been except the function she served. Let your muscles relax completely. Let your jaw unclench. Let your hands uncurl as we turn our attention to the many tragic characters scattered throughout Hallownest, whose fates illustrate the human cost of the kingdom's fall, whose stories are small compared to the grand narrative of kings and gods and plagues, but whose suffering is no less real, no less disturbing, no less deserving of acknowledgement. There is the Hollow Knight itself, the chosen vessel, the child who succeeded where thousands failed, who climbed out of the abyss and was selected by the Pale King as the container for the Radiance. The Hollow Knight was raised in the White Palace, trained in combat, prepared for its purpose, and during that time something happened that was never supposed to happen. The vessel developed an attachment, an idea instilled, a bond with the being who raised it, something that resembled love or loyalty or devotion, a spark of consciousness that made it not truly hollow. When the Hollow Knight was sealed in the Temple of the Black Egg with the Radiance trapped inside it, That spark of consciousness meant that the vessel could suffer, could feel the goddess screaming inside its mind, could experience the agony of containing a being of pure light within a shell of void. The Hollow Knight has been in that temple for years, possibly decades, chained in darkness, the radiance raging inside it, its shell slowly cracking under the strain, its mind slowly breaking, and when the knight finally encounters it, the Hollow Knight stabs itself during the fight, drives its own nail into its own body, and this self-harm is perhaps the most disturbing moment in the entire game, because it reveals that the Hollow Knight is still trying, still fighting, still attempting to fulfill its purpose by destroying itself, by ending its own existence so that the radiance might be contained, so that the seal might hold, so that the kingdom might be saved. The Hollow Knight is a child who was never allowed to be a child, a tool that developed consciousness and was punished for it, a being whose reward for succeeding in the Pale King's test was an eternity of suffering in darkness. Quirrell, Monomon's student, is another tragic figure whose fate haunts the halls of Hallownest. Quirrell was created by Monomon, was given a purpose, was sent away from the kingdom with his teacher's mask to protect the seal, and he wandered for years, his memories fading, his sense of identity dissolving, until something called him back to Hallownest, some instinct or programming that drew him to the place he had left. Quirrell is kind, thoughtful, curious, one of the few genuinely friendly presences in the kingdom's ruins, and he helps the knight at several points throughout the journey. But when the time comes to break Monomon's seal, Quirrell helps the knight kill his teacher, the person who created him, who gave him purpose, who was the centre of his existence, and he does this because he understands that it is necessary, that the seal must be broken, that holding on is prolonging everyone's suffering. After Monomon dies, Quirrell goes to the Blue Lake, sits on the shore, leaves his nail behind and disappears. The game never tells us what happens to him. The implication is dark and deliberately ambiguous. A man who fulfilled his purpose and found he had nothing left, who laid down his weapon and walked away into whatever comes after purpose is complete. Whether that is death or something else, the game will not say, and that silence is itself a kind of horror, the horror of not knowing, of imagining, of filling the emptiness with our own worst fears. There is Cloth, the warrior who came to Hallownest seeking a glorious death in battle, who fought alongside the knight and found the end she was looking for in the fight against the traitor lord, who died satisfied, grateful, content that her death had meaning. Cloth's story is disturbing not because of its violence, but because of its philosophy. The suggestion that a life can only have meaning if it ends in a specific way, that existence without the prospect of a worthy death is not worth continuing, that a person can be so defined by their desire to die well that living well becomes irrelevant. Cloth died happy, but she is still dead, still gone, still a person who could have found meaning in life rather than in death, but who chose not to. And the game presents this choice as acceptable, as admirable even, and that acceptance is itself unsettling. There is Bardoon, the ancient caterpillar who rests in the Howling Cliffs, who has lived so long that he has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, who speaks of the worm, the Pale King's former form, with a weary familiarity that suggests he has seen this pattern before. Kingdoms rising and falling, rulers coming and going, civilizations building themselves up only to tear themselves down. Bardoon's perspective is disturbing because of what it implies about the futility of Hallownest's tragedy. The suggestion that everything the Pale King did, everything the dreamers sacrificed, everything the vessel suffered, was not unique, was not special, was just another iteration of an endless cycle of civilizations that rise and fall and are forgotten. That Hallownest's tragedy is not singular but commonplace, that the suffering of its citizens was not meaningful but mundane. Just another entry in an endless catalogue of kingdoms that thought they were permanent and discovered they were not. There is the Collector, that strange being in the Tower of Love who captures bugs and grubs and seals them in jars, preserving them, protecting them from the infection in the only way he knows how, by imprisoning them. The Collector's love is possessive, controlling, ultimately destructive, a parody of care that has become indistinguishable from cruelty, and the Tower of Love is named with a bitter irony that makes the player uncomfortable, that forces them to consider the relationship between love and control, between protection and imprisonment, between wanting to save someone and wanting to own them. The bugs in the Collector's jars are alive but trapped, preserved but denied any form of existence beyond their captivity, and the Collector sees nothing wrong with this, genuinely believes he is helping them, genuinely believes that imprisonment is better than the alternative, and this belief, this conviction that cruelty is kindness if the intentions are good enough, is one of the most disturbing ideas in the entire game. Let your consciousness drift now. Let the boundary between waking and sleeping begin to blur as we consider the cost of Hallownest's civilization itself, the price that was paid for the Pale King's gift of mind, the hidden horror at the foundation of everything the kingdom built and everything the kingdom was. The Pale King arrived in the lands that would become Hallownest as the worm, a massive being that burrowed through stone and earth, and he shed his form, transformed into the small pale figure with a crown of bone, and he gave the bugs of the waste the gift of mind, individual consciousness, the ability to think and choose and be aware of themselves as separate beings. This gift is presented as a good thing, as the foundation of civilization, as what allowed Hallownest to be built, what allowed art and architecture and scholarship and culture to flourish. But the gift of mind came with a cost that the Pale King either did not foresee or did not care about. For in giving the bugs individual consciousness, he severed their connection to the Radiance, made them forget the goddess who had sustained them, and in doing so he created the conditions for the infection, created the conflict that would eventually destroy everything he built. The bugs of Hallownest did not ask for consciousness. They did not request the ability to think individually, to be aware of themselves, give us to carry the burden of choice and responsibility and self-awareness. The Pale King gave them this gift without their consent, imposed consciousness upon them, changed them fundamentally at a level they could not resist or refuse, and then built his kingdom on their transformed minds, used their new consciousness as the foundation for a civilization that served his vision, his aesthetic, his desire for a kingdom of beauty and intellect and pale light. The bugs of Hallownest were conscripted into consciousness, were drafted into civilization, were given minds they did not request and then expected to use those minds in service of the being who had imposed them. And when the infection came, when the Radiance reached out from the dream realm and the bug's suppressed connection to her manifested as a plague, the Pale King's response was not to question whether his gift of mind had been a mistake, not to consider whether the bugs might have been better off in their original state, not to attempt reconciliation with the Radiance, or to find a way for individual and collective consciousness to coexist, but to create the vessels, to sacrifice his children, to condemn the dreamers, to seal the hollow night, to pile atrocity upon atrocity in defense of the consciousness he had imposed without consent, to pay any cost to preserve the civilization he had built on the backs of beings who were never given a choice in its construction. The Mantis tribe offers an interesting counterpoint, a group that maintained their independence from Hallownest, that accepted the gift of mind but refused to be subsumed into the Pale King civilization, that kept their own culture and their own values and their own way of life. When the infection came, the Mantis Lords sealed the entrance to Deepnest, isolated their village, and preserved their people through discipline and strength, refusing to succumb to the Radiance's call. The Mantis tribe survived, but at the cost of abandoning the rest of Hallownest, of choosing their own people over the kingdom that surrounded them, of maintaining their civilization by letting every other civilization fall. And those Mantises who disagreed with this choice, who believed the tribe should accept the infection or should fight rather than hide, were exiled, cast out, condemned to live as traitors in the Queen's gardens, punished for dissent with permanent banishment. The Mantis Lord's honour is real, their code is genuine, their survival is admirable, but it was purchased through isolation and enforced through exile, and the exiled traitors pay the price, living and dying alone, far from their tribe, never forgiven, never allowed to return home. Sleep now, traveller. Let your body become so relaxed that you barely feel it. Let your breathing become so gentle that you almost forget you are breathing at all. As we continue deeper into the disturbing truths of Hallownest, as we explore the places where horror lives, not in the darkness, but in the choices that were made, in the prices that were paid, in the things that civilized beings did to each other in the name of survival. The void is perhaps the most disturbing element of Hollow Knight's lore, because it is the one thing that resists understanding, that refuses to be categorized or contained or fully explained. Was the void is darkness made substance, an ancient force that existed before Hallownest, before the Pale King, before civilization, a primordial entity that pools in the deepest places and takes forms that defy the logic of the living world. The abyss is the void's home, its source, the place where it is most concentrated and most powerful, and the Pale King built his kingdom directly above it, constructed his white palace in the ancient basin just above the entrance to the abyss, positioned himself as close as possible to the one force in Hallownest that he could not control, could not predict, could not fully understand. This proximity was not accidental. The Pale King needed the void for his vessels, needed its emptiness to create beings that could contain the radiance, needed the darkness to oppose the light. So he built his seat of power above the well of darkness, drew from it what he needed and believed he could use it as a tool, a resource, a substance to be shaped and directed according to his will. But the void has a will of its own. This is the truth that the Pale King either did not understand or chose to ignore, the truth that his philosophy of control and cost and calculated sacrifice could not accommodate. The void is not passive, not inert, not simply a dark liquid to be poured into shells and used for containment. It is something, has desires, has purposes, has a nature that exists independent of what anyone wants it to be, and when the Pale King used it to create the vessels, he gave it form, gave it agency, gave it the ability to act in the physical world through beings that were part void and part divine, and in doing so, he may have given the void exactly what it wanted. The vessels inherit the void's nature. They are not simply shells containing darkness, they are darkness given form, void shaped into something that can walk and fight and explore, and the void's will flows through them, guides them, drives them toward purposes that are the void's own. The knight's journey through Hallownest, every boss defeated, every area explored, every step taken deeper into the kingdom's ruins, may not be the knight's choice at all, but the void's will expressed through a vessel that was designed to be empty enough to be used, first by the pale king, and then by the very substance that fills it. The knight has no voice, no expressed thoughts, no clear motivations, and this silence is not simply a game design choice but a reflection of what the knight is. As a fragment of the void, animated by the void's will, driven by the void's desires, serving the void's purposes in ways that the knight may not even be aware of. The shade that appears when the knight dies is the void inside the vessel, released from its shell, revealed in its true form, dark and hostile and hungry. Every death in the game is a reminder of what the knight carries inside it, what it truly is beneath the mask and the shell, and the appearance of a small bug exploring a ruined kingdom. The knight is void wearing a disguise, darkness pretending to be a person, an ancient force using the shape of a child to move through the world and achieve its goals. And the goals of the void are not the knight's goals, are not the player's goals, are not anyone's goals except the void's own, which remain opaque, unknowable, thus disturbing in their inscrutability. In the Dream No More ending, the knight enters the Hollow Knight's dream, confronts the Radiance directly, and channels all of its siblings, all of the dead vessels, all of the void that was scattered across thousands of shells, into a unified force that destroys the Radiance. The siblings appear as shades, dark forms that swarm the goddess of light, that pull her down, that consume her in darkness, and the knight transforms into the Shade Lord, a massive entity of pure void that destroys the Radiance utterly, that ends her existence, that eliminates the source of the infection once and for all. This ending is presented as the true ending, the good ending, the one where the cycle is finally broken and Hallownest is freed from the infection. But consider what actually happens in this ending. The knight ceases to exist as an individual. It dissolves into the void, becomes part of the unified whole, loses whatever identity or consciousness or selfhood it may have developed during its journey. The knight does not survive its victory. It is consumed by it, absorbed into it, becomes the very force it was made from, and whatever the knight was, whatever experiences it had, whatever connections it formed, all of it is lost, dissolved into the darkness, merged into the void. And the void, having destroyed the Radiance, having achieved whatever purpose it had, retreats. The Shade Lord is glimpsed briefly and then is gone, returned to the abyss, or dispersed, or transformed into something else entirely, and Hallownest is left empty, not just of the infection but of the void as well. A kingdom that has been scoured of both light and darkness, left in a state that is neither corrupted nor pure but simply vacant, a ruin without even the supernatural forces that gave it meaning. Let your body rest now. Let the weight of sleep press gently against your eyelids as we consider the City of Tears, that magnificent metropolis at the heart of Hallownest, where the rain falls eternally through the cavern ceiling, where the architecture is elegant and sorrowful, where the beauty of civilization is most visible and most haunting, because it is the beauty of something that is already gone, already dead, already nothing more than a monument to what once was and will never be again. The City of Tears is named for the water that falls through it, seeping down from the blue lake above, dripping through the stone ceiling in an endless rain that gives the city its melancholy atmosphere, its sense of perpetual mourning, its feeling of being a place that is crying, that is grieving, that is expressing through its environment the sorrow that its dead citizens can no longer express themselves. The city was once the cultural and political centre of Hallownest, a place of learning and commerce and governance, where bugs of all kinds came together to participate in the civilization the Pale King had built, where the gift of mind was celebrated in art and architecture, where consciousness was expressed in the construction of beautiful buildings and the creation of elegant institutions. Now the city is empty. Its streets are patrolled by the infected, by husks that were once citizens, by the reanimated corpses of guards and workers and scholars who died when the kingdom fell and were resurrected by the infection into hollow mockeries of what they had been. The great sentries still march their routes, massive armoured figures that once protected the city and now protect nothing, that patrol empty streets and guard empty buildings and maintain a routine that has no purpose, that serves no one, that exists only because the infection animates them, and the animation follows the patterns they knew in life. The soul sanctum rises above the city, its scholars turn to monsters, its corridors filled with the products of their failed experiments. The Watcher's spire stands at the city's edge, Lurien sleeping within, his eternal dream maintaining a seal on a temple that contains a vessel that is failing, all of it connected, all of it part of the same system of desperation and sacrifice and failure that defines Hallownest's response to the infection. The resting grounds lie adjacent to the city, a place where the dead were interred, where the spirits of Hallownest's citizens were given their final rest, where moths once tended to the dreams of the departed and guided them into peaceful oblivion. But the resting grounds have been corrupted too, the spirits disturbed, the dreams infected, the peaceful transition from life to death disrupted by the Radiance's influence. The moths who tended the dead have mostly vanished, their tribe having a special and terrible connection to the Radiance, for she was their goddess, and they were the first to forget her, the first to accept the Pale King's gift of mind. Bas, the first to turn away from the light that had sustained them, and their forgetting was what triggered the Radiance's rage, what began the infection, what set in motion the chain of events that destroyed Hallownest. The seer, the last moth in the resting grounds, carries the weight of this knowledge, the understanding that her people's abandonment of their goddess was the original sin, the first cause, the event without which none of the rest would have happened. And when she has shared what she can, she too fades, dissolves, disappears, the last of her kind leaving the world quietly, without ceremony, without anyone to mourn her passing. The fungal wastes present a different kind of horror, not the horror of cruelty or sacrifice, but the horror of indifference, mere of a place that simply does not care about the kingdoms and gods and plagues that rage above and below it. The mushrooms grow, the fungi spread, the spores drift, and the fungal wastes continue as they always have, unconcerned with the infection, largely resistant to the Radiance's influence, existing in a state of eternal growth and decay that predates Hallownest, and will continue long after the kingdom is forgotten. The mushroom clan that lives in the wastes has its own form of consciousness, connected through fungal networks, sharing thoughts and experiences through spores rather than speech, a collective awareness that is neither the Radiance's unity nor the Pale King's individuality, but something else entirely, something that the game suggests might be a third way, yet a form of consciousness that avoids the conflicts that destroyed Hallownest. But the Mushroom Clan is also isolated, disconnected from the rest of the kingdom, unable or unwilling to participate in the wider world, their alternative form of consciousness a refuge rather than a solution, a way of existing that works for them but cannot be extended to others. The Crystal Peak is another place where the disturbing truths of Hallownest manifest in subtle ways. The miners who worked the peak, extracting the luminous crystals that lit Hallownest's caverns, have been consumed by the very crystals they mined. The crystal growth has overtaken their bodies, sprouted from their shells, transformed them into hybrid creatures that are part bug and part mineral, that glow with the light of the crystals they spent their lives extracting. This is the body horror of labour taken to its extreme. Workers so thoroughly consumed by their work that they have literally become part of it. Their bodies fused with the materials they harvested, their identities lost in the substance they served. Mila was one of these miners, cheerful and singing before the infection took her, and her fate represents the double threat that Hallownest workers faced, consumed either by the materials they extracted or by the plague that swept through the kingdom, either way reduced from people to things, from workers to husks, from individuals with names and songs and personalities to obstacles that the night must pass through or destroy. The hive, sealed away in its own section of the kingdom, presents yet another variation on the theme of sacrifice and control. The hive knight guards his queen, the massive hive queen Vesper, who ruled her bees with absolute authority, maintaining order through hierarchy and devotion, keeping her people safe by keeping them obedient, keeping them alive by keeping them controlled. The hive sealed itself off from the rest of Hallownest when the infection came, chose isolation over engagement, chose survival over solidarity, and the bees within continue their routines, producing their honey, maintaining their structures, serving their queen, in a state that is technically uninfected but is also stagnant, unchanging, frozen in a perpetual cycle of production and consumption that has no goal, no future, no purpose beyond its own continuation. And now, as sleep draws closer, as your breathing becomes softer and your thoughts begin to blur at the edges, let us consider the royal waterways. That vast network of tunnels and channels beneath the city of tears where the kingdom's waste was sent, where the things that civilized bugs did not want to see were hidden, where the refuse of a great civilization accumulated in darkness and silence. The waterways are home to creatures that were once citizens, bugs who fell into the sewers or were driven there by the infection, who've been transformed by the environment and the plague into things that barely resemble what they once were. Flukemans and flukefires drift through the murky water, their bodies bloated and pale, their movements sluggish and purposeless, creatures that exist in a state of biological decay that mirrors the political and cultural decay of the kingdom above them. The Dung defender, Ogrim, is the most poignant inhabitant of the waterways, a former knight of great honour and courage who has retreated to the sewers to guard the kingdom's waste, who has made his home in the filth because he still believes in Hallownest, still wants to protect it, still serves a king who is dead and a kingdom that has fallen. Ogrim is cheerful, enthusiastic, genuinely happy to fight you, genuinely happy to have a purpose even if that purpose is guarding a sewer. His loyalty is touching and deeply sad in equal measure, for he does not know that the Pale King is dead, does not know that the other knights are gone, does not know that the kingdom he serves no longer exists except as ruins and memories and the fading echoes of a civilization that consumed itself. Ogrim's dream form reveals his memories of the 5 great knights, the elite warriors who served the Pale King, who protected the kingdom with their skill and their devotion. The 5 great knights are all gone now, scattered or dead or transformed, and Ogrim is the last one who still serves, the last one who still believes, the last one who still guards and fights and protects, even though there is nothing left to protect, no one left to serve, no purpose left to fulfill. His loyalty is the most disturbing kind of loyalty, the kind that persists after everything it was loyal to has been destroyed, the kind that continues to serve after the master is dead and the cause is lost and the mission is impossible. Ogrim's cheerfulness in the face of this reality, his genuine happiness in a sewer surrounded by waste. His unwavering belief in a kingdom that no longer exists is either the most admirable thing in Hallownest, or the most tragic. Or perhaps both, the admiration and the tragedy inseparable, two sides of the same tarnished coin. The grim troop represents another disturbing aspect of Hallownest's world, a travelling circus of nightmare creatures that arrives in the kingdom to perform a ritual of flame and sacrifice. The grim troop is drawn to dying kingdoms, to places of tragedy and collapse, and they harvest the lingering energy of that collapse, the nightmares and the suffering and the dying embers of civilizations that are burning out. Grimm himself is a being of nightmare, elegant and theatrical and deeply unsettling, a master of ceremonies for a ritual that requires the player to gather flames from the most painful places in Hallownest, flames that burn in the sites of greatest suffering, that feed on the agony that permeates the kingdom's ruins. The nightmare lantern that summons the troop burns with a flame that is neither the radiance's light nor the void's darkness, but something else entirely, a third force that feeds on suffering, that is attracted to tragedy, that arrives at dying kingdoms like a vulture arriving at a corpse, drawn by the scent of decay, ready to consume whatever remains. The ritual of the grim troop requires the grim child, a small creature born from the nightmare flame, to be fed with the flames of suffering gathered from across Hallownest. Each flame is found in a place of particular horror, a place where the infection burned most intensely, where the suffering was most concentrated, where the tragedy was most acute. By gathering these flames, by feeding them to the grim child, the player is participating in a cycle that transforms suffering into sustenance, that converts tragedy into fuel, that takes the agony of Hallownest's fall and turns it into energy for the troop's perpetual performance. The grim troop does not cause suffering, but it profits from it, feeds on it, requires it for its continued existence, and in doing so, it raises a disturbing question about the relationship between tragedy and spectacle, between suffering and entertainment, between the horrors of a fallen kingdom and the audience that watches those horrors unfold. Let your thoughts drift now. Let them become softer and less defined, like shapes dissolving in fog, as we consider the ancient civilization that existed before Hallownest, the forgotten people who left their mark in the form of arcane eggs and void idols and strange inscriptions that even the Pale King could not fully decipher. These ancient beings understood the void in ways that the Pale King never did, had a relationship with the darkness that was not one of exploitation, but of something else, something that the game hints at but never fully explains. The ancient civilization created the void idol, created seals and bindings that contained or directed the void, had knowledge of the darkness that predated the Pale King's arrival by unknowable spans of time, and they are gone, completely gone, not fallen, not ruined, not even remembered except in the artifacts they left behind. Whatever they knew, whatever they achieved, whatever relationship they had with the void, it was not enough to save them. And their disappearance is perhaps the most disturbing thing about them. The suggestion that even understanding the void, even having a relationship with it, even knowing things about the darkness that no one else knows, does not protect you from the same fate that claims every civilization eventually. The Pale King found their artifacts and studied them, used their knowledge to inform his own work with the void, built upon their understanding to create the vessels, but he did not learn the lesson of their disappearance, did not recognize that a civilization that understood the void and still vanished was a warning, not a model, did not understand that the knowledge he was building upon came from a people who were destroyed by the very forces they thought they understood. The Pale King repeated their mistakes, added his own, and met the same end, and now his artifacts will be studied by whoever comes next, and they too will build upon his knowledge, and they too will fail to learn the lesson, and the cycle will continue. Civilizations rising and falling, each one believing it is different, each one discovering it is not. The king's moulds and wing moulds that guard the White Palace are perhaps the most quietly disturbing creations in all of Hallownest. They are constructs made of void, shaped into the form of armoured knights, animated by the Pale King's will, programmed to protect the palace and its occupant. They have no consciousness, no awareness, no sense of self. They're truly empty in the way the vessels were supposed to be. Tools without minds, weapons without wills, and are instruments of violence that serve their purpose perfectly because they have no capacity to do anything else. The king's moulds are what the Pale King wanted the vessels to be, truly hollow, truly empty, truly devoid of anything that might interfere with their function, and they are terrifying in their perfection, in their mechanical devotion, in their absolute absence of anything resembling life or thought or feeling. They are the logical conclusion of the Pale King's philosophy, the purest expression of no cost too great, beings created to serve without the inconvenience of consciousness, without the complication of feeling, without the risk of developing bonds or attachments or ideas that might compromise their function. But the king's moulds could not contain the radiance. They were empty enough, hollow enough, devoid enough, but they lacked the divine spark that the vessels possessed, the connection to higher beings that made the vessels potential containers for a goddess. The Pale King needed something that was both empty and divine, both hollow and powerful, both nothing and everything, and the only way to create such a being was to conceive children, real children with the potential for consciousness, and then suppress that consciousness, force it down, hollow it out, create something that should not be possible. A being that is simultaneously alive and empty, conscious and hollow, divine and void. The horror of the vessels is not just that they were created and discarded, but that they had to be created as people first, had to have the potential for thought and feeling and self before that potential could be suppressed. Seika had to be children before they could be tools, had to be alive before they could be made hollow. The three endings of Hollow Knight each present a different kind of horror. In the first ending, the knight takes the Hollow Knight's place, becomes the new vessel, absorbs the radiance into itself, and is sealed in the temple of the Black Egg, chained in darkness, suffering alone, repeating the cycle that failed before and will fail again. This ending is the most straightforwardly disturbing, the suggestion that nothing has changed, that the sacrifice was pointless, that the night has condemned itself to the same eternal torment that the Hollow Knight endured, and that eventually, years or decades or centuries from now, another vessel will come, and the cycle will repeat again. In the Sealed Siblings ending, Hornet is trapped in the temple alongside the knight, sealed away in the darkness with the sibling who is now a prison for a goddess, condemned to the same fate as the dreamers, conscious and aware, and unable to escape. This ending adds Hornet's suffering to the knights, doubles the tragedy, seals another person in conscious imprisonment, and Hornet's final scream of denial as the door closes is one of the most emotionally devastating moments in the entire game. The sound of someone who has lost everything, her mother, her father, her kingdom, now losing the last sibling she had left, sealed away in the dark with the goddess that destroyed everything she loved. The Dream No More ending, as we have discussed, destroys the radiance but also destroys the night, dissolves the vessel into the void, ends the individual existence of the character the player has guided through the entire game. This ending is the most hopeful in terms of Hallownest's future. The infection is ended, the radiance is destroyed, the cycle is broken, but it is also the most disturbing in terms of what it says about the nature of heroism and sacrifice. The suggestion that saving the world requires not just risking your life, but ending your existence entirely, dissolving into something larger, giving up everything that makes you you in exchange for a victory you will never experience, never know, never benefit from. There is Elderbug, sitting alone in Dirtmouth, the last remnant of a community that has slowly emptied as people descended into Hallownest and never returned. Elderbug is not brave enough to go down himself, not strong enough to fight the creatures below, not connected enough to have anyone who might come back for him. He simply waits, day after day, in a village that grows emptier with each passing season, talking to anyone who passes through, grateful for any company, any conversation, any brief reminder that he is not completely alone in the world. Elderbug's loneliness is not dramatic, not violent, not supernatural. It is the ordinary, quiet, devastating loneliness of being the last one left, of outliving your community, of watching everyone else leave while you remain, unable to follow, unable to help, unable to do anything except wait and hope, and slowly come to terms with the fact that no one is coming back, that the village will never be full again, that you will spend the rest of your days in this empty place, as talking to strangers who are just passing through on their way to somewhere else. And there is the God-Seeker, a being from a distant land who has come to Hallownest seeking the mightiest gods, seeking to worship power in its purest form, seeking to find beings worthy of her devotion. The God-Seeker's quest leads to the God Home, a dreamlike realm where the knight must fight every boss in the game in sequence, a gauntlet of combat that culminates in the absolute radiance, the true form of the goddess of light at the peak of her power. The God-Seeker's philosophy is disturbing in its simplicity, its reduction of all value to power, its insistence that only the strongest are worthy of worship. That might makes divine right, that the proper response to encountering a powerful being is to kneel before it and serve it without question. The God-Seeker does not care about morality, about justice, about the consequences of the god's actions. She cares only about power, about strength, about the ability to dominate, and in this she represents the most dangerous form of devotion, the kind that worships without questioning, that serves without understanding, that kneels before power regardless of how that power is used. In the secret ending accessible through the God-Seeker's dream, the Void, having unified and destroyed the Radiance, also consumes the God-Seeker, bursts forth from her body in a flood of darkness that suggests the Void is not content to remain in the abyss, that its destruction of the Radiance was not its final act but its first step, that the ancient force of darkness, having been given form and purpose by the Pale King's vessels, has developed ambitions that extend beyond Hallownest, beyond the Radiance, beyond anything the Pale King could have imagined or controlled. This ending is the most ominous, the most disturbing in its implications, the suggestion that in trying to use the Void as a tool, the Pale King unleashed something that cannot be contained, something that will continue to grow and spread and consume, something that the kingdom's fall set in motion but did not complete. There is Bretta, the small bug who sits alone in her house in Dirtmouth, writing stories in her journal, creating fantasies about heroes who rescue her, about warriors who sweep her off her feet, about love that arrives suddenly and transforms everything. Greta's loneliness drives her into fantasy, into a world of stories that bear no resemblance to reality, where she is the centre of every narrative, where she is always rescued, always loved, always the object of someone's devotion. When she encounters Zote, the incompetent knight whose delusions of grandeur are so complete that he genuinely believes himself to be a great warrior, Greta's fantasies attach themselves to him, transform him in her mind into Grey Prince Zote, a figure of power and nobility that exists only in her imagination. Greta's infatuation with Zote is built entirely on lies, on the image he projects rather than the reality of what he is, and when the knight defeats Grey Prince Zote enough times in Greta's dreams, shattering the fantasy, Greta becomes disillusioned, packs her things, and leaves Dirtmouth entirely, heading out into a world that she has only ever experienced through the lens of her own fantasies. Her departure is both liberation and tragedy, freedom from the delusion that trapped her, but also a journey into a world she's not prepared for, a world that will not match her stories, that will not provide the heroes and the love and the rescue that she has always imagined. The stag system that once connected all of Hallownest's regions is another quiet monument to the kingdom's decline. The last stag is the sole surviving member of a species that served as Hallownest's transportation network, massive beetles that carried passengers through tunnels connecting every corner of the kingdom. The other stags are dead, their stations empty, their tunnels silent, and the last stag remembers them all, remembers the routes that are no longer travelled, remembers the passengers who are no longer alive. Remembers a time when the stations were full and the tunnels echoed with the sound of hooves and the chatter of travellers. The last stag continues to run his routes because it is all he knows, because stopping would mean admitting that the system is dead, that the passengers are gone, that his species has been reduced to a single individual maintaining a network for a kingdom that no longer exists. His dedication is heartbreaking, his loneliness is palpable, and his eventual discovery that he is not the last of his kind, that there is a stag egg hidden in a forgotten station, is a moment of bitter-sweet hope, the possibility that something might continue, that not everything is lost, that even in a kingdom of ruins and death, there are seeds of continuation that might, against all odds, grow into something new. The nailsmith. The craftsman who forges and strengthens the knight's weapon is another character whose fate illuminates the disturbing themes of Hallownest. The nailsmith is a perfectionist, devoted to his craft, obsessed with creating the perfect nail, and when the knight's weapon has been upgraded to its highest form, when the nailsmith has achieved the pinnacle of his art, he asks the knight to strike him down, to end his life with the perfect weapon he created. Believing that there is nothing left for him after perfection has been achieved, that a craftsman who has created his masterpiece has no further purpose, that the only appropriate ending is to be killed by the thing he made. If the knight strikes him down, the nailsmith dies satisfied, content, completed, his life ending at the moment of his greatest achievement, and his death the final expression of his devotion to his craft. If the knight refuses, the nailsmith eventually finds his way to Nailmaster Sheo, who has abandoned combat to pursue painting, and the two find a new life together, the nailsmith discovering that there is more to existence than perfection, that life after your masterpiece can still be meaningful, that purpose does not end when your greatest work is complete. The choice between these two outcomes is the player's, and neither is wrong, but both are disturbing in their implications. The first suggesting that life without purpose is not worth living, The second suggesting that the desire for a meaningful death is a form of despair that can be overcome, that the impulse to end your life at the moment of your greatest achievement is not noble but tragic. Consider also the Watcher Knights, those massive armoured sentinels who guard Lurien's spire. They were once the elite guards of the City of Tears, powerful warriors encased in thick armour, devoted to the protection of the Watcher and the seal he maintains. But the infection found them too, corrupted them, turned them into mindless engines of violence that attack anything that approaches the spire, that fulfill their protective function not out of loyalty or duty, but out of the base aggression that the infection imposes on all its victims. There are 6 Watcher Knights in the chamber, but only 5 fight. The 6th lies in the corner, inert, its body still, its infection somehow contained or dormant. If the night dream nails this dormant Watcher Knight, it falls from its perch, preventing it from joining the fight. A small mercy in a game that rarely offers them. But consider what this means. A warrior who was once one of Hallownest's finest, who served the Watcher with honour and devotion, now lies broken in a corner, neither alive nor dead, neither infected nor free, existing in a state of suspension that is perhaps worse than either corruption or destruction, a limbo of inert suffering that has no end and no purpose. The first thread is sacrifice, the way that Hallownest demanded sacrifice from everyone and everything, the way that the Pale King's philosophy of no cost too great permeated the entire kingdom, infected it more thoroughly than even the Radiance's plague. The vessels were sacrificed, the dreamers were sacrificed, the Hollow Knight was sacrificed, the Soul Sanctum's victims were sacrificed, the citizens of the City of Tears were sacrificed, Deepness was sacrificed, the miners of Crystal Peak were sacrificed. Everyone and everything in Hallownest was consumed by the kingdom's desperate need to survive, and in the end the kingdom consumed itself, ate its own foundations, destroyed its own people, and fell into the ruins that the night now explores. The second thread is consciousness, the gift that the Pale King gave and the curse that the Radiance imposed, the 2 forms of awareness that tore Hallownest apart because they could not coexist, because individual thought and collective unity are fundamentally incompatible, because giving bugs the ability to think for themselves meant taking away their ability to be part of something larger, and the Radiance could not accept this loss, could not let her worshippers go, could not stop reaching for them even when her reaching destroyed them. Consciousness is both the greatest gift and the greatest curse in Hollow Knight's world, the thing that makes civilization possible, and the thing that makes the infection inevitable, the source of art and architecture and beauty, and also the source of suffering, of awareness, of the ability to know that you are being destroyed and to be unable to stop it. The third thread is futility, the sense that pervades everything in Hallownest, the understanding that none of it mattered, that all the sacrifices were for nothing, that the kingdom was doomed from the moment it was founded, that the infection was always going to come, that the seal was always going to fail, that the Hollow Knight was never truly hollow, that the dreamer's suffering was never going to be enough, that everything the Pale King did, every cost he paid, every atrocity he committed was pointless, was useless, was a waste of lives and suffering and potential that accomplished nothing except prolonging the inevitable. Hallownest was built on a foundation of sacrifice, and the sacrifice was for nothing, and that is perhaps the most disturbing truth of all. The fourth thread, and perhaps the most quietly disturbing of all, is the thread of silence. Hallownest is a kingdom of silence, a place where the voices have stopped, where the conversations have ended, where the songs have faded and the arguments have ceased, and the laughter and the weeping and the ordinary sounds of living beings going about their lives have all been replaced by the empty echo of rain on stone and wind through tunnels and the distant and a rhythmic clicking of creatures that no longer remember what they are. The night moves through this silence without breaking it, a voiceless being in a voiceless world, communicating nothing, expressing nothing, existing in the same silence that has consumed the kingdom. Every room the night enters was once a place where bugs talked and worked and lived, where there were sounds and voices and the constant low hum of a civilization in motion. Now there is nothing, just the night's footsteps, the sound of its nail, and the silence that fills everything else, that presses in from every direction, that is so complete and so total that it becomes a kind of sound itself, the sound of absence, the sound of everything that is no longer there. The silence of Hallownest is the silence of a mouth that has been permanently closed, a voice that has been permanently stilled, a world that has been permanently muted. It is not the silence of peace, not the silence of rest, not the silence that comes at the end of a good day, when you lie down and let the quiet settle over you like a blanket. It is the silence of extinction, the silence that follows when the last voice has been silenced, when the last song has been sung, when the last word has been spoken, and there is no one left to speak the next one. This silence is what the night walks through, what the player experiences, what Hallownest has become, and it is, in its own way, the most disturbing thing about the kingdom, more disturbing than the abyss or the soul sanctum or the infection, because it is the sound of finality, the sound of a civilization that will never speak again. Let your body settle now. Let the last traces of tension dissolve. Let your mind release its grip on these stories and allow them to become part of the quiet darkness behind your closed eyes. The kingdom of Hallownest is silent now, its streets empty, its temples sealed, its citizens transformed or destroyed or fled, and the rain still falls in the city of tears. The mushrooms still grow in the fungal wastes, the crystals still glow in the peak, and the void still pools in the abyss, dark and patient and waiting, always waiting. The Pale King is dead, sitting on his throne in the dream realm, impaled by his own instrument of rule, surrounded by the traps he built to keep the world out, alone in the palace he created, alone with the knowledge that everything he did was wrong, that every cost he paid was too great. That the kingdom he built on sacrifice was consumed by the very sacrifices that built it. The White Lady is bound in the Queen's gardens, imprisoned by her own guilt, unable to forgive herself for the children she bore and the deaths she caused, waiting for something that may never come, for absolution or understanding, or simply for the end of her interminable penance. The dreamers sleep, or slept, their dreams maintaining locks that held back a flood that was always going to break through, their conscious suffering buying time that the kingdom wasted, their sacrifice earning nothing except more years of a slow and inevitable decline. And the night, the small silent vessel that the player guides through these ruins, is itself a disturbing truth. A child born to be discarded, a failed experiment that somehow survived, a fragment of the void shaped into the form of a bug, exploring the ruins of the kingdom that threw it away, fighting the creatures that were once its parents' subjects, breaking the seals that its parents created, confronting the goddess that its parents tried to contain. The night has no voice because it was never meant to have one. It has no expressed thoughts because it was designed to be thoughtless. It has no identity because identity was the thing the Pale King tried to prevent, the thing that would make a vessel impure, the thing that would cause the seal to fail. And yet the night acts. It explores, it fights, it grows stronger, it makes choices that seem deliberate, that seem purposeful, that seem to suggest a mind at work behind the empty mask. Is this the night's own will, or the void's will expressed through the night? Or is the night a person making choices or a tool being used? Is the journey through Hallownest an act of agency, or an expression of something older and darker that uses the night the way the Pale King once used the Hollow Night, as a container, as a means to an end, as a cost to be paid for a purpose the night does not understand? The game does not answer these questions. It presents them and lets them sit, lets them linger in the player's mind, lets them disturb and unsettle and provoke without resolution, without closure, without the comfort of knowing what is true and what is not. And that ambiguity is itself disturbing, the refusal to explain, the refusal to clarify, the insistence that some truths are unknowable, that some questions have no answers, that some horrors are most powerful when they remain unresolved. Sleep now. Let these truths rest beside you in the darkness. Let the stories of Hallownest's fall, of the Pale King's cruelty and the Radiance's rage and the Void's inscrutable purpose become part of the quiet that surrounds you, part of the stillness that holds you, part of the gentle darkness that is not the Void's darkness, but the simple, natural darkness of a room where someone is falling asleep, where the world is quiet and the stories are over and there is nothing left to do except rest. The kingdom of Hallownest sleeps now in its own way, not the conscious sleep of the dreamers or the infected sleep of the Radiance's victims, but the sleep of something that has ended, something that has run its course, something that has exhausted itself and has nothing left to give. The rain falls in the City of Tears. The mushrooms grow in the fungal wastes. The crystals glow in the peak. The void pools in the abyss. And the silence is complete, unbroken, total. The silence of a kingdom that has said everything it has to say and has fallen at last into the kind of rest that comes when all the costs have been paid and all the sacrifices have been made, and there is nothing left to spend, nothing left to lose, nothing left except the ruins and the rain and the slow, patient, eternal darkness. Breathe gently. Let your body be heavy. Let your mind be quiet. The disturbing truths of Hallownest are real, but they are also stories, narratives that exist in a world that is not yours, that concern beings who are not you, that describe horrors that are contained within the boundaries of a game, within the limits of a screen, or within the safe distance of fiction. You can hold these truths without being harmed by them, can understand these horrors without being consumed by them, can carry the weight of Hallownest's tragedy without being crushed by it, because you are here, in your bed, in your room, in the real world, and the real world is quiet tonight, and you are safe, and you are warm, and you are falling asleep. Picture the kingdom one last time, not as a place of horror, but as a place of rest. The abyss is still now, the void settled, the shells of the vessels lying undisturbed on the dark floor, their suffering ended, their brief and terrible lives concluded, their forms at rest in the place where they began. The City of Tears is quiet, the rain still falling but softly now, a gentle patter on stone and glass and the surface of the quiet canals, the sound soothing rather than mournful, the eternal tears of the kingdom becoming something like a lullaby, a rhythm that repeats and repeats without changing, without stopping, without demanding anything from you, except that you let it wash over you, let it fill the spaces between your thoughts, Let it carry you gently toward the border where waking ends and sleep begins. The green path is green and still, the leaves motionless, the acid pools glowing faintly in the darkness, the fossilized remains of Un's influence spread across the walls and floor in patterns that are beautiful even in decay, even in the absence of the god that created them. The fungal wastes breathe slowly, the mushrooms exhaling spores in gentle puffs that drift through the still air like thoughts dissolving in the moments before sleep, present and then gone. Tangible and then vanishing, real and then nothing. The crystal peak glows with a soft, steady light, the crystals humming at a frequency too low to hear but not too low to feel, a vibration that settles into your bones and your muscles and your slowly quieting mind, a resonance that is neither the radiance's light nor the void's darkness, but something neutral, something calm, something that simply exists without agenda or purpose or demand. And Dirtmouth is quiet above it all, the bench empty, the well sealed, Elderbug resting in whatever peace he has found, the village small and fading but still here, still standing, still a place where someone might stop and rest before moving on. The night is gentle in Dirtmouth, the stars visible through the cavern opening, the air cool and clean, and if you listen carefully, if you let the silence become not absence but presence, you can almost hear the kingdom breathing, slowly, deeply, the way you are breathing now, the way all things breathe when they're finally at rest, when the stories have been told and the truths have been spoken and there is nothing left to do except let go. Let the darkness hold you. Let the quiet carry you. Let sleep take you gently and completely into its care. The Pale King's philosophy was no cost too great. But there are costs that should never be paid, sacrifices that should never be made, prices that are too high regardless of what they purchase. And knowing the difference between necessary sacrifice and needless cruelty, between the costs that must be paid and the costs that should be refused, is perhaps the most important thing that the Hollow Knight's lore can teach us. The lesson that hides beneath all the horror, beneath all the darkness, beneath all the disturbing truths we have explored tonight. Some costs are too great, some sacrifices are too much, some prices are simply too high to pay, no matter what they buy, no matter what they promise, no matter what they are supposed to achieve. And recognizing this, understanding this, accepting this, is not weakness but wisdom, not failure but strength, not surrender but the most important kind of courage there is. Sleep now. The stories are finished, the truths are told, the kingdom rests, and so can you. Good night.